Well, it'll be an enormous week in New South Wales politics this coming week, as former Deputy Premier John Barilaro has his say at the inquiry looking into how he was granted the job of New York Trade Commissioner. An independent report into what happened will land this week too, as we discussed with Richo. Meanwhile, there's a battle to elect the Deputy Premier on Tuesday, and a major flood inquiry will report to the Parliament as well. That's all ahead of us. And for now, there are plenty of other issues bubbling around as well. Joining me now is New South Wales One Nation leader Mark Latham. Mark, thank you very much for your time. Firstly, to New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet, who this weekend told Liberal Party members that they'll need to paint a better vision for the future in order to win next year's state election. Now, he said the Liberal Party cannot simply be the clean-up crew for Labor's mess or a watered-down Labor light. Now, that was a reference, no doubt, to the Morrison government's defeat in May. But the New South Wales government is the same, absolutely Labor light. It's become that way thanks to Matt Kean.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a bit late to be saying they're not going to be Labor light. That horse is well and truly bolted. 100% renewables, net zero, bigger target than Albanese by 2030, $10 billion green energy programs, $182 billion of gross debt, gender fluidity teaching in the schools, academic standards falling, sexual consent and coercive control laws right out of the woke textbook. I mean, you'd have to say that the Kean Perrottet government is, leaning towards green rather than Labor light. They're full on green. So I don't know what Perrottet's talking about there. If he's going to reverse direction, that's welcome. He needs to get rid of Matt Kean and get back to mainstream policies at New South Wales level.
But you're listening to the people from the conference yesterday, the Liberal conference, saying that the talk was that Kean has the numbers to be Deputy Liberal leader. Are they listening to anyone? Are they hearing from people on the street? It's just absolute suicide.
Well, Kean's taken them to the far left of politics. You'd have to say Kean's got the numbers to control Perrottet, and that's what he's been doing for the last 10 months. Perrottet's only there because of Kean's numbers in the so-called moderate faction. The moderates are Liberal Greens, of course, woke as they come. So Kean's running the show, and, they've got multiple problems, not just in these Trade Commission positions, but losing touch with the mainstream, losing touch with conservative base. There's a lot of Liberal voters who don't recognise today's Liberal Party. They don't recognise the green energy policies. They don't recognise the large deficit and debt. They don't recognise the woke social agenda. They certainly don't recognise what's happening in our schools. So why would they vote Liberal or National Party?
Yep, exactly. Now, just the new Labor government federally, the climate change bill enshrining into law 43% emissions by 2030, been passed by the House of Reps. Now, Climate Change and Energy Minister Chris Bowen has outlined the next phase of the plan, which is to create a national network of offshore wind power zones. 6 areas will be selected, Mark. Maybe we could, correlate the 6 zones with the 6 teal seats that exist now.
Well, they're not doing that. They're picking on the Illawarra and Newcastle offshore in New South Wales. And of course, Chris Bowen's been complaining about the cost of nuclear. That's not true of the small modular reactors. No. And when you put the cost of huge transmission wires, hooking them into the network for renewables, they're the most expensive energy of the lot. But Bowen hasn't factored in the logical proposition that offshore wind is 2.5 times more expensive than onshore. And why wouldn't it be? I mean, you've got to go put it out in the ocean. So it's more expensive. I don't know if the private sector will take up the investment. But if they do, the loss of amenity, the views, property values. There's some people who've purchased multi-million-dollar properties there on the coast of Newcastle and the Illawarra in New South Wales. They'll be wondering, yes, why isn't it on the teal seats of the northern beaches of Sydney or Manly, where Zali Steggall is? Why haven't they got these horrific, horrible-looking things driving down property values along the Sydney coastline? And let's not forget, the New South Wales government, also Albanese, he was there on the Central Coast beaches, they said that drilling for gas offshore was a terrible-looking, disastrous thing. Well, it's just a pimple on the horizon compared to hundreds and hundreds of these windmill things floating in the ocean there. wrecking the view and amenity. I mean, it's a disaster. We've prided ourselves on pristine coastlines and views, and unfortunately the Bowen plan is going to wreck that for the Hunter Valley and Wollongong.
Yep. Now, quickly, Pauline Hanson's in trouble. An Indonesian minister has said to her, "I say never insult Bali, you've got your facts wrong." She was only arguing that there are cattle in places like Bali. You can get poo on your shoes, basically, she was explaining, and that can come into the country. What's so hard to understand about that?
Well, what's the Indonesian minister arguing? There's no poo on the ground in Indonesia, in Bali. I mean, it's just, there's no cow poo on the ground. What do the cows do with their feces?
I'm with you.
They sort of reverse digest them or something. I mean, the proposition is obvious that, of course, these are risks that would destroy agriculture in Australia through foot and mouth, and we can't be careful enough. What we should be doing, if the Indonesians were fair income, Chris, to help us, is have these quarantine checks in Bali itself, and also Jakarta. So when the tourists disperse to, a dozen different airports in Australia, they've already been checked before they got on the plane. Check them again, and we must do everything to keep foot and mouth out of the country.
You can't stress the warnings enough, and I think Pauline Hanson is on firm ground, even if there's a lot of poo in Bali at the moment. Thank you so much for your time, Mark. Great to have you on the program.
Thanks, Chris. Cheers.
Okay.